Welcome to Beyond the Fine Print, the podcast where we help you simplify the ever-evolving world of commercial laws and technology and answer the major questions facing lawyers today. I'm your host, Rory O'Keefe, and in each episode, we'll be breaking through the jargon so you can stay ahead, keep it cool, and take control back. Now let's get started. Welcome back to Beyond the Fine Print. I'm Rory O'Keefe, lawyer and your host, and today we're entering into a Scottish castle. Legal tech castle, that is, and any good round table is full of noble intentions, whispered sabotage, and the occasional manager who thinks transformation means a 2-hour demo and a LinkedIn post. My guest, Merlin Beyts. He's the content director at LegalTechTalk. Many of you should know about this right now because it's one of, maybe it is, the biggest legal tech conference out there. And he's interviewed hundreds of speakers, vendors, GCs, and occasional whiteboard zealot who would be voted out in round one of the traitors. Merlin has seen the alliances, the betrayals, and the moments when the rollout died quietly in a SharePoint folder. Now, he isn't a lawyer, which I like to say, which makes him the perfect faithful. He watches from the ramparts, asks the blunt questions lawyers won't, and curates the conversations that should shape our practice. Merlin, welcome to Beyond the Fine Print.
Thanks so much for having me, Rory.
So after all the hundreds, I feel it's probably thousands of sessions that you have run over the years, what's the most, if you can say, traitorous line you've heard or hearing about legal tech these days?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know about the most traitorous one for me, but I suppose the one that causes some stir at times at events that I've run is when people on stage say, you have to ask whether you need technology. You know, it's part of some transformation related panel, some tech related panel, and someone says, are you at the point where you need technology or do you need to take a step back? Something along those lines. And there's sometimes this kind of, murmur or even kind of a very loud hush around the room where people go, am I in the right place? Am I in a legal tech event? Or, I've had some people look at me and go, is this allowed? Aren't you meant to be the purveyors of all the finest technology that the Silicon Roundabout has to offer? And that, I think, is something that causes it, but it's not at all. That's probably the thing that comes to mind the most, really. I don't really hear too much controversial stuff. The stuff that I hear that's really controversial comes in Chatham House roundtables, which I'm not allowed to divulge, unfortunately.
No, you can't do that to us. Dangle it and then take it away. That's cruel. Our listeners won't appreciate that.
As you mentioned, Rory, I'm a willing faithful.
Yeah. Do we believe? Not sure. I have a sneaking suspicion you'd make a really good traitor. But anyway, I do like that question though. But I phrase that question slightly different. It's not like, should we go back to the quill and ink? It's more of just because it's shiny. So I've said it in a previous episode, I call the shiny object syndrome. Just because it's shiny and fancy and says it does all these amazing things, do you really genuinely need it? Or is there something else out there that you could be using? Because there's a lot of technology that we have through the various different, I'm not going to name them because they're not paying me to, but all those different technologies that we currently have had for donkeys. And we're now saying, oh, we need something new. So you actually have a tool which you could be using to do exactly that. And you don't have to pay a fortune, or sometimes it's not even a fortune. It's just a small extra just to create something and then go through a training process when it's all there already. But, start with what you have, look at what you have and see. But let's get into this a little bit more, because the purpose of today's episode is really to take us all through exposing those saboteurs, mourning fallen rollouts, and interrogate AI's rise to power, and just celebrate that village that actually makes tech work. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about canals, castles, hearts, and betrayal. So let's play. Okay, let's start with the first betrayal. I did read one report this year, I think it was from the GC Legal Tech Pulse, and they said 44% of corporate legal departments are using legal tech frequently. Now that's progress. And only 19% are confident that their teams are trained to use it well. So that's not really transformation. That's perhaps the poison goblet, the secret touching of Paloma Fate's face by Mr. Carr. But using something Stephen Fry had said recently, he said language is our heart. And he said, when we stop sharing stories around it, the social fabric frays. So in practice, we've got this transformation breaking away with teams who are telling their stories Are there questions around who's to be trusted, who's indispensable, who's quietly sabotaging everything? So when you change this tool set without rebuilding that heart that we gather around, the conversation could potentially go cold. Now you're asking, where is he going with this? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, you've watched all these panel speakers, you've interviewed so many people around their rollouts, and the ones that seem to go really well, and those that have those tiny bit trails from people who are just not ready for that change or don't have that change mindset or even growth mindset, for that matter. What kinds of examples or stories have you heard around this, and perhaps even around the designing an anti-burnout rollout playbook, for example, which would be fantastic if we could just plug that into one of the tools as our playbooks? What kind of themes and stories have resonated best with you?
Well, do you know what? I've actually got one of my own, and there are a few from my time in running events that I can share as well. But weirdly enough, before I was even in events, the first job I had out of university was, and I will ask your listeners not to judge me here, I was young, vulnerable, and needed the money. I was a tech recruiter, and we had, as soon as I joined, we had just moved from one CRM system to another one. I think it was Salesforce or something. And the training that they gave us on it, or the way that they got us to use it, was by saying, forget that old one. Here is an hour and a half long workshop where this is how you use Salesforce. This is how you're going to upload when you're talking to candidates, any conversations that you had with clients, etc. And that's where you're going to put your deals. And that's going to help the leadership to know how this office is doing. Cool. Here's how you use it. Goodbye. Go forth and conquer. And if we think about what recruitment is, it's, sales on steroids, really. You're selling one product to another, and then either of those products can change their mind. So it's pretty hard graft. And those people are not as interested in the job as they are the money that comes with it. And it was taking people longer to use Salesforce, up to an hour and a half, 2 hours a week of their time. It was stopping them from making as much money. So they're working longer for less at a job that, frankly, at times can be pretty unpleasant. And then within, 2 or 3 months, the only person who wasn't using a spreadsheet to track their clients and their candidates was me, because I didn't know anything different. And I left that job after just about 12 months. So the issue there is everyone was looking at it going, why the hell am I using this? This is pointless. It's stopping me from making money. It's stopping the company from making money, all in the name of, so someone else can have a slightly easier way of building a slide deck to show, whatever board. So no one was interested in using it for so many reasons. No one said, you know what, in the long term, this will help you make more money. People who use this best, you will find candidates that you won't have found before. There are great nuggets you're going to get in here. This is going to help you make more money, which is basically the motivation of most recruiters. And I know that firsthand, or at least a primary one. And so they'd spent all this money, and then the sales manager was getting incredibly frustrated by the people not using it. And the way that he motivated people to use it was saying, the company spent a lot of money on this, so you have to use it. And you just got annoyed at people who weren't.
That's the worst way.
And that's the thing, the issue there's no motivation. You've not tapped into what people want to get out of their roles. You've not tapped into how it links them to the wider purpose of the company. And also you're taking money out of their pockets, and as well as their spare time anyway, which can be in recruitment pretty minimal. That kind of, I think, settles, a big part of this equation of, well, what do you do, first? This is not necessarily what you do first, but when you're talking about rollout, and when you're talking about adoption, and when you're talking about why things fail, we can talk about mindset, and we can talk about the efficacy of certain technologies or even certain providers in particular. But the thing is, you could do everything objectively 100% correctly until you get to that, let's roll it out, company wide. Let's get the people who are actually going to use this tech to use it. If you don't get them on board and get them using it in a way that I would say is somewhat enjoyable, you're not going to get ROI from whatever it is, be it generative AI, agentic AI, any kind of, even automation tool, a CRM system. It's not going to happen. That's where I see it the most. Now let's talk about kind of the bit to the left of tech, the start, and then tech in the middle, and then the bit after tech on the right. So that's the sort of the bit on the right side of tech, the bit after. So that's the adoption, the change management, the continuous improvement. I've also had plenty of stories of people coming to my event and not fulfilling a major part of that first bit, that bit to the left at the start, which is someone has come to my, there's people who've said to me, they've come to my event, they've seen a shiny bit of kit, they've been sold to by some excellent tech, sent by some excellent tech salesperson. And then afterwards, they found out that actually they didn't have the right people to make the transformation work. They didn't actually know it was a problem that really needed solving, or it did solve one problem that created about 4 or 5 others. And then they've wasted a bunch of money there. It's one of those things where I'd say it's kind of some of the principles I don't think are truly that difficult to grasp. The process is very difficult. Dealing with people is very tough. I'm not going to for one second sit here and say, oh, just do X, Y, and Z, and every transformation will make you £1 billion a day. I'm not that foolish to say that. But if you don't follow these principles, you honestly don't have a hope in hell.
Oh, don't worry. I'm going to take that soundbite and take out the caveats that you just said. So Merlin said, you follow this transformation program and you will get £1 billion.
Yeah. Beyond the fine print, decontextualized sound bites.
It's a very important point is to try, if you're trying to sell anything to anybody, any change, we kind of forget that. And I find it even more comical that you were in a business where you're there to sell. You're doing matchmaking. I always call it matchmaking service in my head. That's what you're trying to do, trying to get people to see if they're good fits. But you're selling them. And then you forget that internally, you still need to sell. And it's not that you're selling them a product, you're selling the why. Why should I care? And any presentation skills training I've ever had to do over the years, they always say, know who your audience and tell them why they should care. It's the first reason why I set up this podcast was because I felt that in-house voices, the in-house lawyers' voices, was not being heard enough. It was being added into lots of, no offense to the conferences, because I know that, you do a very good job. You brought me in to speak, but, and many of my colleagues and peers have done so as well. And the idea I always have is that you need to have a voice. And that's the reason why I want the voice to be heard from an in-house lawyer's perspective. I may sit outside of it, just the type of role I do in supporting in-house lawyers, but I still think that there is a voice to be heard. That's the why for me. That's why we have a growing following from our, somebody likes to call fine friends, which they wrote into us and said, okay, I'll try it out, see if it works. So beyond the fine friends, and it's all good. But the attitude that we have is that just because that's I've forgotten the movie, but just because I've built it, they will come. And it's like, no. And also just saying, well, it's mandatory. It's the same reaction I get from one of my teenage sons. And I say, well, why should I care, Dad? And I say, well, just because you're giving up having to argue the point because they're not listening. They're the saboteur. Yeah. All right. Clearly a traitor. But it's that kind of thinking is necessary to try and push you through. I think if your rollout plan includes everyone will just figure it out, you've already lost the shield. It's that. And I always think it's very interesting for anybody in any of these conferences, start with the why the listeners should be listening to. Yeah, I know that somebody says you have to give them a few seconds to figure out what you're wearing so they can judge you based on, your choice of tie or something or whatever. And then they'll start listening to you. But if you haven't caught them at the beginning, they're going to switch off. They'll politely sit and wait for you to finish. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, well, it depends how close to the front they are, in my experience. The social contract sat at the front of the auditorium is very different at the back.
You have people who have the guts. I don't know if the guts is the right word, but they've fallen asleep in the front. Not in mine, thankfully, but I've seen it for other people. I think it was because the room was too hot or something, but they were fast asleep. I was going, okay.
You do have some events which do like to open the beer taps a little bit early like ours. So especially when it gets to the afternoon of day 2 and you've been doing 25,000 steps a day, I try not to judge people or be hurt too much by it.
You can't. Let's move into, I was coining it as the graveyard of good ideas. So there was one report I saw, I think it was through Contract Works. They said there was a large share of in-house teams have been through failed implementations. And some of those failures took careers with them as well. You need to have strong walls to your castle, but the problem is somebody left the gate open. So, oh well. And legal work today is full of clerical labor masquerading as professional identity. And vendors are selling us tools to automate it, but no one's asking what we'll do with the time saved. And that's where I think that, using the analogy, the traitors will win. So we're busy, but are we busy doing the right work? And we've created all this tech. We've brought it all in. It's all great. CEOs happy, CFOs, CIOs see everything, and they're all happy because they can say we've ticked boxes. The return on investment you mentioned has saved time, but what have you replaced it with? It's not like we're talking about paralegals, which was used. There was one sector of London City where there was like over 1,000 employees whose total job was just to take out a quill and ink and write words onto a page to transcribe in the various documents. And that's how the phrase, like, they got paid by the word. It wasn't hourly billing, it was by the word. So, but that was then, where's the quill and ink? It was then replaced. We know where the technology moved forward from, pen to all the way up until what we're using now, our keyboards and voice dictations. So we everything has moved. But do you have any examples of what you've heard of any of these implementations that they've gone wrong, but why? And you've said one example is the failing to get the buy-in from your teams. But like, are there other ones where you see that where it has gone wrong? And I'm just thinking of people who have been implementing tools and they're not that particularly thrilled with what they've bought. Could they have made better choices by learning from other people's mistakes? And the answer is yes, but I'm asking, what are they? What are kind of the big doozies that you've seen?
Well, do you know, to kind of frame my answer, there's a few things that are happening right now, a few kind of quotes and stories going on right now, which I think some people are, in my opinion, not entirely justifiably getting very pent up about. So one is that stat that came out recently, something like 91% of companies haven't seen any measurable ROI from AI. There was the Reddit thread a few weeks ago. And then there's also kind of people asking if Robin AI is the canary in the coal mine kind of thing. In terms of the failures, there's lots of reasons why things fail. And I think what I see from, like Robin AI, for example, I'm incredibly confused by. They did a $50 million raise or something last year. And now they're on some insolvency sites, which, for clarification, doesn't mean that they are insolvent. But I think the reason why most of them fail is it's rarely due to one reason. That said, I think saying that it's never about the efficacy of the technology is probably erroneous at best. And I think that there maybe are probably one or two tools out there that don't actually do as advertised. It does always tend to come down to the people. You might say, oh, it came down to money. Well, that's because you didn't manage that's because not you. That's because a person did not manage the finances well enough. They did not manage the budgets well enough. You can say that it's because of, unforeseen market circumstances. Well, if it's a turbulent market right now, then maybe you decide as a human being that it's not the best decision to invest in something. It tends to come down onto your preparation. I see at every event I've been to, this isn't, legal's not immune to any of these trends, by the way. Obviously, there's some differences, there's idiosyncrasies, etc. There's adaptations. But what I always see in successful stories is when people have come to my event, when they're looking at the tech, when they're walking around the expo floor and they are actively going to talk to people. If I ask them, so what specifically are you looking for? They say, we have issue X. We need process Y to be a bit more adjective Z. So, whether it's quicker, more efficient, easier to use, lots of different metrics, lots of different ways that things can be improved, right? And so that's what we're after. If it's not following that kind of train of logic, then we're not going to invest in it. And then there's sometimes when people go around the expo floor and they're just, I don't really know anything about it. I'm here to just find out what's going on out here. That's absolutely fine. But if you're that person, you end up buying some technology, you're probably going to land yourself in a bit of hot water. And also, it takes months to make that mistake. So not sort of cutting the cord anytime between the start and the end of that process is pretty silly. But then there's other people who come to the event and they just go, I'm not the expo floor. I'm going to walk around and do some activations. Oh, there's a cool thing. There's a cocktail bar and, there's someone I know. I'm going to have a chat with them. But I'm going to spend most of my time actively going to sessions to figure out what's going on and what I need to do about it. And then you see them maybe a year later, or maybe even, at another event 6 months later, they're there walking around the expo floor going, okay, I found out what I needed to do. I know what I want to get out of it. And, I know how to get this ball rolling. There's a thing that I kind of say, which is transformation it's a bit like buying a house. Kind of industries have been transforming for a very long time. You mentioned pen and quill. I may even say email. You mentioned about the ROI, the time saving of, or what, when we switch to laptop. But what about when we switch from those pneumatic tubes or memos? What did we do from the money that we saved from, people who worked in mailroom? There's probably lots of different examples of where that time and energy and even capital went. And there's probably some unsuccessful ones as well. But to my kind of analogy of house buying, is we've been doing it for a very long time. Lots of people have done it. And yet every single process that's engaged in is entirely different. I'm currently trying to buy a house right now with my brother, and we're just looking into it and discovering that it's an absolute nightmare and that land laws in the UK are fundamentally totally feudal. If we just had a bunch of money and when we buy house, cool. Well, that's how you end up renegotiating the land lease, which is incredibly expensive and and time consuming. And that's when you find out that, I didn't do the surveys properly. Or what do you mean stamp duty? These are the kind of things that come up if you just go in all guns blazing. It does require some time and thought and effort. And I do appreciate, however, that there are some leaders out there who aren't necessarily in charge of the tech buying or the transformation. They're kind of maybe just overseeing it. They just say things need to be better. I have genuinely heard people say to me that their boss has told them to, quote, do something with AI. I mean, just go tell your marketing team that, we should go viral. It's as silly, it's as ridiculous as that. And so some people are under a lot of pressure to do these things very quickly. And one thing that I would say is if you are under that pressure, you need to be able to push back. You need to be able to push back, if only just to say that, fine, I'm going to do this, but I think that we're rushing this and there's an accountability piece that we can talk about so that, if it goes wrong, I've got something to fall back on. You mentioned jobs have found themselves in the graveyard as a result of failed, very time consuming, very expensive transformations. And if you're under that pressure to do things as quickly as possible, then you need to push back. And you also need to say that, those competitors who maybe done it much quicker, well, there's two things you can say. One, they might have been doing it for a lot longer behind the scenes, just not telling anyone about it. And the other thing you could say is, well, if they haven't been doing that and they have just bought a bunch of kit, watch whoever they interviewed for that piece in Business Insider and, check their LinkedIn 6 to 12 months time and see whether they're still in situ. Pace is important, but not at the expense of efficacy, and certainly not at the expense of sometimes millions of pounds or dollars or euros or, whatever currency.
I think that resonates an awful lot because a lot of our listeners are lawyers themselves, so they are particularly alert to these kinds of questions. But moving at speed can sometimes be easier for, say, like an in-house in a small department as opposed to the big departments, because they have a lot more to resolve and nearly everything has to be agreed by committee, which is easier to do when you're in a small company where the numbers of stakeholders are a lot reduced. I ask people to look at kind of three areas when they're doing it. I first look at the data. So when you're talking about AI, we're talking about machine learning. We're talking about driving the data that you hold or dipping into somebody's database in order to get those data sets, because you don't have a high volume of certain types of contracts or high volume of certain types of litigation. So you want to draw on other people's expertise. So which tools out there have that large database, which is also protected? So where's the data? What do you actually need? Where is it coming from? Where is it sitting? And that you have the necessary policies in place when you're using it. So if you're using Gen AI, make sure your AI policy is up to date, and please don't let your HR team draft your AI policy. I've heard a few that they said because of social media policies sitting within HR's remit, they allowed AI to also sit within their remit. It's not. You need HR in the conversation as you do legal, as you do finance, as you do operations, as you do C-suite, as you do whoever else. It's a governance forum in order to ensure that you are maintaining accountability throughout. The interesting part as well is around the return on investment. I always question people, whether it's CapEx or OpEx questioning that they have going on. I always move it to saying, well, what are you seeking to achieve? Are you trying to save time? Are you trying to save money? Are you trying to save both? Is it something completely different? Is it just cultural shift if you're just trying to make their life easier for teams? What is the actual? Because the question is so you said 6-12 months. The question is, what is the success metrics that you're applying for this rollout of this new technology? How will you show that you've actually been successful? Yeah, you're paying more money. And legal departments themselves know very, very clearly that they're a cost center, they're a cost strain, and they have to justify their existence year and year and year. And if they're using new technologies, they need to show that it was value for money. How do you show it? So agree up front what you're trying to achieve. Like if it's drafting time, you go from 3 hours to 1 hour, or, contract reviews, and, per month, you've got 100 contracts to review. How quickly have you been able to review this by employing some piece of technology? How have you reduced the error rates? The human point of that. If you had like 8 errors in a day, or now you reduce it to 2 errors in a day. And then maybe it's client satisfaction. And for in-house teams, it's the internal client satisfaction, which I know for some of you don't care at all about your internal clients, but that's fine. But you also need to kind of pretend you care, okay? But it's trying to improve that, because I was with one company for a while, and it was all down to sentiment. They thought legal was super busy and they didn't have time to turn things around fast enough. And when I joined, I said, "Is that true?" They said, "No, it's not true." I said, "Okay, but have you showed them the data that shows that you've sped things up? You're far more efficient. Nobody's waiting. You don't need these big, I'm going to respond to your ticket in 72 hours. You don't have those kind of responses." And they said, "No, we haven't done it." I said, "Well, let's start doing it. Let's track it. And then we'll go back out to all these teams and tell them, so this is how we've improved everything for you." That will dispel a feeling, because you dispel the feeling with facts. And that's what I was asked them to do. It's very interesting, your take, because it kind of aligns with where I'm at in my thinking around it. I'm a huge fan of the using technology to speed up your work. But sometimes it won't be the ideal piece. Like you mentioned email. I always question, do you remember Blackberries?
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I also think that there's this big issue right now, which is I'm going to take all this time prepping for some tech and then buying it and implementing it. And that's going to take, a year, 2 years, 3 years, however long it takes. And then there's going to be something new in that time that then means that this is basically kind of obsolete. And I think it's just it's a bit zero sum then, isn't it? Because it's not going to be obsolete. It's not going to be as good as the tech in 3 years' time, granted. But no one most transformation experts will tell you that digital transformation is a journey. It's not point A to point B. It is running around in ever-reducing circles at times. Or, that quote from the history ballers, how do you define history? It's just one effing thing after another. And yeah, kind of that's what a lot of transformation is. So I do kind of understand the issue there, but what's your alternative? If your alternative is doing nothing, then I guarantee you what you're using now is probably obsolete. So using something that's only 3 years obsolete in 3 years' time is better than using something that's probably, for some, I've heard some horror stories. I'd go as far as 25, 30, 40 years worth of obsolescence.
I like the phrase it's been used a lot now as various different speeches, but I agree with it. It says AI is not going to take your job, and lots of reasons I explained in the previous podcast episodes. So AI is not going to replace you as a lawyer, but a lawyer using AI could, or rather will. And I think there is truth in that. So we have, it's like if you weren't using the internet, for example, and using emails to correspond with your counterparts, and you're going back to the postal service, which will be music to the post office and Royal Mail's ears. We start sending letters out again with stamps and everything. Are you going to survive as a practice if everybody's just been talking in the background, getting everything else done rapidly and fast? They can turn things around the same day, within the same hour. I'll come back to you in the afternoon, and they do, and you're waiting for a day, 2 days afterwards for your post to come through.
It's a really good point. I think right now, yes, if someone's using AI, they probably are going to get the job done quicker than you. Not necessarily. It depends on the role. It doesn't necessarily mean better, but I think the internet analogy is good. But I think it's, when we come to thinking about the future, I kind of take issue with this AI is not going to take your job sentiment. If we think about Wimbledon, for example, I don't know if your listeners are fans. If they're London-based, they probably can't get away from Wimbledon of the glorious British summer. But Hawkeye was introduced, about 20 years ago? And this year, there were no line judges at Wimbledon. And someone said to me, but there was a bit where it got wrong and didn't get it right. Yeah, that's because someone didn't turn it on. That was the only thing that went wrong. So I'm not saying that it's going to happen within 5, 10, or even 15 years, but the idea that anybody is immune from technology taking their jobs is probably a little bit fanciful. And it's a bit of a sort of a recency bias thing as well. If you looked at, people who were making automobiles in maybe the very early 20th century will probably think, technology, a robot could never do this. Well, they do most of it actually now. Not sort of some of the other bits, but in terms of the big chunks of car you see, that's done by massive automated processes. People who made sweets probably thought, they'll never get the flavors right. Oh no, it's actually way better to just industrially measure things and have things cut perfectly by a robot. So the fact that being a lawyer is a lot more complicated means that it's probably one of the reasons why it hasn't happened until now. But when ChatGPT came out, was a few years ago, no one could have thought that large language models or any kind of natural language processing have developed that far, right? It really did do a full Micah Richards bursting onto the scene, didn't it? It really shocked everyone. And now, very, very soon after that, we're talking about agentic AI. That's the new shiny thing that everyone's talking about. There's going to be a new thing after that, and after that, and after that. So I do take issue with the idea that, technology could never take my job. I write content for a living, and that's what a lot of people are using things like ChatGPT to do. So it's certainly something that I'm thinking about. But that doesn't mean, give up, the end is nigh, what's the point? Because the point is that there is going to be someone using AI who's going to do the job better. And there's someone who's going to transform their legal department who, if you can't do it to yours, they will be brought in to do it. This is something that we see all the time. We probably see the chopping and changing of roles and responsibilities and movement around is happening more on the law firm side of things at the moment. But this whole sort of transformation trajectory, I've seen it in insurance ages ago. I've seen it in finance teams. I've seen it in HR teams. I then saw it in insurance again, and we'll see it in legal.
I agree, but I think that and it's not to be all high and mighty about it, but I do think that the technology is not there yet.
Completely.
To pick up the nuances, to pick up the different threads, because the law itself, we all have been trained to understand it's a living and breathing piece. It's something that has to change with society. It's being retested as new court cases coming through on a common law jurisdiction, civil code, civil jurisdictions slightly different. But for us in the common law jurisdictions, we do have to deal with precedents and the new cases brought through with the testing the old thinking. And that's why things that we may have been, like I take the example, like in Ireland, for example, divorce didn't come in until the 1990s, but it came in through legislation. But prior to that, there was a whole series of case law that questioned things like the family home and the rights of the woman at home, because traditionally, as soon as you got married, you're supposed to resign from your jobs. My mother had the exact same thing when she was working with Aer Lingus. But the idea was you got married. Therefore, why would you want to work? Your whole role now is to stop having children. And the Irish communities were all about having as many as you possibly can. So it was kind of an interesting, and everything has changed. But when we changed, we said, yes, but now they are separating, but there was no divorce. And the law changed to emerge with a new idea of protecting the family home, so that the man who is typically the only person who owns the land or owns the property can't just remortgage it to fund his gambling debts or something like that. The property is still protected. And then if they separate, then at least the wife is no longer going to lose that property or be taken out from under her. And I know everybody's going to find it very odd from a gender perspective why I'm saying she's at home, etc. I know we've moved on and moved forward. We moved forward into a dual income households with smaller number of children because society has shifted in the UK-Irish context. I always find it very interesting because when we say it, we say, yeah. The other thing I also point out to people is that AI machine learning tools, they're based on the data set that you provide us. And if you're not feeding it, it's out of date. As soon as you've used it and you've fed it, it's now out of date. I think there was reports, and I've written about it as well, is that describing AI as an amazing, glittering, amazing skyscraper that's built on quicksand, because the data is the quicksand. So unless you're feeding it with the new legislation or new thought leadership or new ideas from different thought leaders around the world or from sources across the internet or sources that they can find from new books, etc., you can't really have it as accurate as you want it to be. And because case law is going to clamp down on copyright and on use of all these, screen scraping and all these things that are feeding these tools, you end up in a scenario where they may not get the most up-to-date or most thoughtful pieces because, as you said, content has been written in most instances now with the use of AI. It's becoming more neutral and more generic unless you can create the correct prompts to create something more thoughtful and more engaging. You end up in a scenario where everybody's got the same data, everybody's got things. And yes, access to the justice it's democratized in that sense. But you still need somebody sharp out there who says, I know that's what it says, but should it? Is that really the answer we want? And then test that. So it's at the moment you get a paralegal answer and it's a brilliant first draft. Yes, but it's missing things. And certain areas it thinks is important is not. So that's where I think where we're at with AI right now. I have no idea what's going to happen the next 6 months because it's always changing, which is the reason why I turn up at your events, because honestly, we need to figure out where is this all going and what's the next big, amazing, bright idea in this transformation. I do think that the legal profession is undergoing a shift in what the role of the lawyer is and what the future lawyer will look like. And I've been speaking to a professor from Harvard and from our London universities as well, who are saying the same thing, that they're struggling a bit to help students picture what their role as a lawyer will look like, because nobody's really too sure. It's exciting as well as slightly nerve-wracking as well at the same time.
I think like anything, embracing change is pretty key. It is very scary. I mean, if people thought that their working lives changed significantly over COVID. I mean, look at event organizers. That was an entire huge revenue stream for every single event business gone in minutes, basically. As soon as lockdown happened, any of those events for the next, events sort of started up around live events started up around sort of September 2021. So it's about 18 months. And I was at a startup at the time. We only had that event. We had the one revenue stream and it was event. And we gave ourselves a problem in that we just went, we don't want to do a virtual event. It's the same with Legal Tech Talk. You won't see us do a virtual conference. We do things like virtual roundtables and online content, but we don't do the virtual conference.
You mean you have not embraced the metaverse to deliver your conferences through the metaverse?
How dare you invite me on your show? I know,
I'm so tongue-in-cheek.
How dare you invite me on your show and you come at me with that. I'm astonished and outraged and tempted to close my laptop, but my ego won't let me. But this is what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying this is like, lawyers, look at event organizers, look at what we did. But, we had to immediately go, okay, well, what's something that still aligns with our values and still helps our community and still ultimately makes us money, but also gets our clients in front of their potential clients. And so we had to work on that basis. And, there were lots of big events companies that they've certainly since COVID, it's accelerated a lot. But before COVID, they don't really launch their own events anymore. They buy small events that have cornered up sort of a niche in a market, and they go, okay, right, we're just going to do that, and then we're going to clone that and put that in another part of the world, be it the UAE or the US or Asia, LATAM, wherever. And this is the kind of thing that a lot of the big events executives sort of didn't necessarily, they always describe things like moving to digital as a headache. And for us at Legal Tech, we were working together at the same company, not LTT, a different one. And we all went, okay, well, how do we do this? Let's do this now. Let's just do it this way. And we iterated and we messed up loads. And then we found out a way that worked. And yes, we were in a place to do that because we were small and agile, but we also had less money than everyone else. We were also living off the breadline. People were taking pay cuts. So I think if you are a lawyer looking at this world where not only is the world just in a pretty crazy macro environment, but the state of law and the legal profession, and as you say, the practice of law is in huge flux. Not to be too macabre about it, but, chaos is a ladder, as Baelish would say, from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I have the other phrase, isn't it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So, and it sounds like we're in that space again. I think it's very exciting. Because I know some people get slightly nervous with this conversation and discussion, and feel free to write in with whatever, your thoughts on your war stories and what you want to address. But I did hear quite interesting. Hadn't thought of it before. They said teams that have already pivoted to using AI in lots of different ways that make sense. And they've gone through the transformation. It's been a success. They said the piece of the time that they got was allowing them not to deal with the mundane part of changing something or making something more efficient or moving a step in a process or whatever. They've allowed them time to actually dig deeper into more complicated principles of law, which they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do. And I'm saying this to in-house lawyers, not to private practice. Because private practice, you're supposed to be the experts. You're supposed to know the minutiae of every single detail, every single article written. But for in-house, don't have time. Sorry, firefighting all the time. Now they've created space where they can have that one meeting a week where they purposely in a hybrid working model have all gathered together to have 20 minutes to talk about this particular area that they're seeing as a trend emerging from the data. Maybe we should think about, does this still matter to us? Why does it matter to us? If it doesn't matter to us, how do we pivot to change to make this life easier for everybody else? But they've never had the opportunity to do that. And actually, junior staff members are finding this really enjoyable because they get to have what we always had in law, which is a debate, a discussion. Not a debate sounds negative, but a discussion around points of law, which we wouldn't ordinarily have time to have those conversations around. And I actually think that part of the puzzle is quite exciting for a lot of people, which we kind of miss out. I need to ask you though, within this innovations, you can't do a wait and see approach with technology. And I'm sure you're going to say absolutely, absolutely, because you want lots of people going to your conferences. And I say it with tongue in cheek, but actually it is a super well organized event. I get paid nothing for this, by the way, but going to it is, in some ways, it can be overwhelming because there's so much that you can get involved in for these events that you run, especially Legal Tech Talk. There's so many really good speakers, and you're always missing out on somebody. That's what I find, because there's different stages, different people talking at different things. And you're going, I can't be all everywhere. So if you've got a team, go with a team, because then you can at least divide and conquer.
Yeah, that's by design.
I know. But I think it is so interesting. It's interesting because I know a lot of people just go and they get overwhelmed by just how many different tools are out there, how many different things are kind of showing the same thing. They're not really that different. It's just got different logos. But the question I always say to a lot of people before you decide on the technologies you're going to dip your toes in or whatever into the water, check who owns it. If somebody she's giving training to C-suites around AI literacy, and she's now having to take on, she's actually growing her team because she doesn't have enough time to do it herself. She's got now a team going across the UK and Ireland, educating boards on AI literacy. And she told me that one of the interesting things was look at who owns it. If they are pretty much 100% owned by a VC or something of that nature, or they've gone through series, MQ, whatever they're at, you have a question mark of whether they're going to still exist. Because there will be maybe just, and I know I've got VC friends of mine who will say the opposite, but there is a question mark of whether they will still exist in a few years' time if the market still keeps evolving, where the price point keeps reducing. And because there is a bit of a price war going on out there, so you are in a very strong position when you're buying the technology to negotiate them down. And I'd encourage everybody to do it. I know we always feel, oh, no, I'll just buy it and it's fine. No, just pretend you're arguing for somebody else, not for yourself. And then argue that discount, because they're there. They're salespeople. They're there to sell you. She said, look at who owns, because if you've got a VC in the background who has the reputation of just trying to squeeze as much money as they can, there's a chance that their technological roadmap is not going to be as exciting as, say, somebody else who's very eager and willing to receive the feedback, who has a lawyer or lawyers involved in the development of the tools, who understands our pain points and understands what we need, who can talk our language, and not just the person who's reading from a script for commission on sales. Just interrogating that a little bit more before you enter into one technology or not, because there is now thousands of options out there for different types of tools that are saying you can do everything. On the agentic AI piece, the only thing I'd say on that one was there was one event where you write into them, I had a few questions for them. I got a response within 10 seconds after sending the email. And I was like, it's an automated response. But it was cleverly written to say, picking out some of the points that I mentioned, give me some of the answers that they thought I would need. But it was in 10 seconds. That's an interesting. I wonder what tool they're using. That was the only question. It wasn't their answers that I was interested in. It was what they were using. I responded to that because I was trying to test it. And I said, so I'm talking to an AI tool. I thought they would have told me, but anyway, that's another legislative requirement to consider. And they came back. But when I objected to one thing they had said, it was more like challenging what they had said, not objecting. You got an instant response effectively to that. Also 10 paragraphs long. I was going, okay, maybe I would, if I was the event manager, I might stall the responses to even like 10 minutes after.
Yeah.
If you want to give the illusion that you care and that you are giving a personalized service or response, 10 minutes. And that goes to the law firms as well, who are kind of churning out advices by using lots of very good research tools and creating that. And then they're just throwing it out. One law firm threw it out mid-call with their client, which I also was... I was kind of, that's a bit like, yeah, I've heard everything you've said. You're talking too much and here's your answer. Go away. I go, no. Again, just give the illusion that you care. If you don't.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'd always say, don't wait 10 minutes, wait 11. That's make it a human response time.
Oh, it's fun. Okay. So anyway, I could talk at length on all this stuff, but I wanted to get back to the human behind the mic here. So Merlin, I have 2 questions to ask all my guests. So what's one misconception people have about your work that makes your eyes roll?
Oh, what? No, there's several. One common misconception is who I make stuff for. So whether it's an event or a webinar, it's for the people who consume it. And I think the people who pitch me sessions, for example, people who understand that I have a lot of people to cater to, and they come to me with something very specific. One of our sessions that we had at our event in June was someone said, I think a really good idea for a session would be around demystifying the process of law firms buying tech. And here's why I think it would be interesting for each key segment of your audience. And that's really great. That's really, it's someone saying, I'm really interested in talking about this. I like it when people are interested in what they're talking about on my stage, but also this is how it helps you. And there are times when people pitch me content where it's clearly very self-serving. I've spoken to them about a session where it's about, maybe it's about talent acquisition or it's about regulatory compliance or, whatever. It's something about very specific, because I can't have every session going, what's the future of law? That's, that's going to make for a very, very, eventually very repetitive, actually very quickly repetitive event. So I think the misconception is that I'm not serving people who pay to be on sessions. I'm not serving people who even necessarily who speak on the session. I'm serving the people who are in the audience. And I think that's a misconception around sort of people that, maybe I've worked with sometimes. It's a bit frustrating. My frustrating misconception around my friends is none of them know what I do. Everyone I know who works in events, none of their friends or family know what they do. That's less frustrating. It just means I don't really talk to them about work.
If it helps, I think my family think I work at a call center.
Do you not?
Because you got a headset on and you're just typing away. So, and I'm chatting away to people, having a great time.
Just a headset on, typing away. So actually at a call center and getting no calls.
No, that is very good. And actually to all our in-house teams who are looking to expand their brand, I know that there's a lot of conversations about personal brand and kind of putting yourself out there a little bit more, because I think the last person I heard from the Law Society in England well said that 30% of the profession is now in-house. So there is an importance for that voice to be heard on panels, on stages and in webinars, etc. So if you use your voice, I think, yes, I really like the idea. If you've got something important to say and if you want people to hear it, you need to deliver it to the people who are there listening. I was told in presentations, find out who the audience is. Is it the C-suite or is it the entry-level person? And you will then pivot to, I'm using that word far too much in this episode, but you tailor it to that audience accordingly. And if it's a mixture of everybody, I typically go for C-suite, pitch to them because they're the ones you need to impress. Now, my second question, what's the stuff that you find fun with your work? Like what actually lights you up?
Oh, I mean, quite a lot of things. One, I just like making stuff. That's fun. I enjoy the process of creating stuff. I like, when I'm writing agenda titles, I quite like being provocative, contentious, just, playing about with words. It's fun. To me, at this point, it's a bit like Lego, where you're going, oh, that word shouldn't go with that one. That means they're going right next to each other. That's nice and fun for me. They can't all be like that. Sometimes you just have to do how to integrate generative AI into your law firm. I like speaking to interesting people. The great thing is that not only can I come on podcasts like these, which is great, and thank you very much, I also speak to some of the most influential people in the industry, some of the most senior people in the industry. About something like 70% of our speakers on next year's agenda will have come straight through me. I will have reached out to them or, been introduced to them, and I would have had a call with them. It's fascinating to hear what they're doing. The final, and I think the most important part of, why I enjoy what I do is I am a weapons grade nerd. And most people who've worked with me will tell you that. In fact, I can't think of many who wouldn't. And in my job, I get to learn things at an incredibly fast rate. And, there's that sort of knowledge confidence. Your knowledge goes up and your confidence goes up. And then your knowledge gets to a certain point and your confidence drops. And then it sort of happens again. With me, it's a bit more like sort of just diagonal lines, a bit like the sort of, sort of heart waves of someone having a panic attack or something. So I'm always learning new stuff, and I just enjoy it for the sake of enjoying it. Doesn't necessarily have to be for any purpose, which means that also I can come on your podcast, share what I've learned, and in 2 weeks' time, I'll immediately be going, oh, everything that I've been talking was total nonsense. So the occasional sleepless night when I realized I've chatted some total rubbish to someone in a public forum.
No, not a chance, not for this one anyway. Maybe in the other podcasts, but I don't care about them. No, I do appreciate this. And I think I remind everybody that, Merlin is not a lawyer. So he's having to deal with lawyers. So he needs an award or an Oscar just for that much itself. If you take the analogy, you win, you're a faithful and you found all the traitors, because pretty much talking to all the lawyers. Yeah. So there we go. Read into that what you may.
These are my customers you're talking about.
I know. I'm saying it. You're not. You love them. No, but Merlin, thank you very much. You've been extremely generous with your stories and with your courageous honesty as well for this podcast. And I actually just want to point out to our listeners, remember this warning: technology is magnificent and amoral. So it will do the work it's told to do. The moral work is deciding whom it serves, how it's governed, and how we keep our practice humane. It's ours. So don't hand that spade to a machine and walk away. Ask the awkward questions. Bring users into the room and refuse a vendor's glossy slide deck without a test case and a training plan. And above all, don't be the houseplant in a meeting. It's nice to have, but not when one's changing practices and ways of working. So be faithful, spot the trailers, and if you must, banish those wasteful tools and processes. So please, if you have any questions or anything you want to raise with me, or send war stories or ask a question, please send them through to me. The team here reads them all. And until next time, stay curious, stay alert to the traitors, and keep stepping beyond the fine print. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Fine Print. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss the next episode. And if you have any burning questions you want us to cover in a future episode, send them to beyondthefineprint@rmoklegal.com. See you next time.